I'll get going with the welcome. So, first of all, welcome to our webinar on data governance needs in biomanufacturing and sort of discussions around the application of fair data principles. The purpose of my sort of little introduction here is kind of twofold. One is to demonstrate how the data governance topic underpins a lot of the activities we see within BioPhorum, but also to describe a little bit of the sort of the hierarchy of forums, roadmaps, work streams that you see and you'll hear about today. And that's especially for those of you who are maybe new to BioPhorum. Just so for those of you who are used to BioPhorum, please bear with me while I do that. You'll see from the list there that BioPhorum consists currently of 11 forums, of which the Technology Strategy Forum is one. And it's within that forum that the BioPhorum Technology Roadmap has been created. And one work stream coming out of that was something called the Digital Technology Road Mapping work stream, and the data governance work that you're going to hear about today sits within that work stream. So that's the hierarchy that you'll hear about today. We would ask the members of that work stream are very keen to have a dialogue with you, the practitioners across the industry, on topics related to data governance, perhaps the use of fair data principles, which we know are used in certain parts of the industry already, and also perhaps get a better understanding of how critical personas are currently used or perhaps not used within the industry. So please make active use of the chat, post builds, comments, maybe even things that you might like to hear people talk about, and we will try and work that into the presentations as best we can. And we will finish, as is the norm, with a Q&A activity at the end. As I mentioned, the Technology Strategy Forum, which is represented by this circle up here in the top right-hand corner, is one of 11 forums within the BioPhorum family. And I think it's important to say that each forum has its own governance in place, which oversees the number of work streams or the work streams that get prioritized within that forum. And that's for the very simple reason that there's always more work to be done than there is resource to be doing it. So that's the forums themselves. In the TS forum, as I mentioned earlier, there are two pieces of work. One is the development of a technology roadmap, which is the version 2 that you see in front of you, and also the adoption of key elements of that roadmap. So those are the sort of the two pieces that the TS forum oversees. And the digital technology road mapping work stream I've been talking about is designated strategic work stream within that forum, i.e. it touches upon several spaces within that vision. Now, obviously, I don't have time to describe the roadmap in detail, but what we will do is we'll share a link to the roadmap after the webinar to everybody who's taken part in the webinar, so that you can review it at your leisure. Suffice to say that there is one thing that down at the bottom right-hand corner here that I hope you can see. It talks about meeting the data demands of patients, stakeholders, compliance, and regulatory. And that basically shows that this is one of these key capabilities or competencies that the governance from within the forum has seen as underpinning all the work that we do. You might ask who gets involved to make that roadmap. I think the right number of companies at the moment, there are about 48 members of the TS forum at the moment, both biomanufacturers and various categories of supply partner. I did a little bit of digging, and 34 of those 48 companies have taken an active part in this work stream over the last year or two. And you'll see in a minute that, just pull on the next slide, that the data governance piece is only a part of what the digital technology roadmapping work stream is currently up to. So we're also doing things around a readiness model, just starting work on some control strategy framework and some digital technology transfer work. So if you are at all interested, please, my email's at the top there. Get in contact with me. And if you'd like to get involved, then you're very, very welcome to do so. And I think that's probably all I need to say in terms of the introduction, except to just please remind you to get involved and start posting things in the chat, because the team would be very grateful to see those. Thanks, Nettie, for putting my email in there. So on that note, I'm going to ask Yash to present. I'll just pull up his slides for you. Now, Yash Sabharwal, is CEO and of QBDVision, I believe a founder as well, of course, Yash. He has a passion for novel software, accelerating novel therapies to patients. Their QBDVision's digital CMC platform being one of them. I do encourage you to have a look at his LinkedIn profile, because there's lots of really interesting bits and bobs that he's done over his career. I just found out from that he has a background in optics, so that in itself was very interesting. So Yash, over to you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say about data governance.
Great, thank you. So it's great to have all of you on the call today. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are around the world. So yeah, we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about data governance needs in biomanufacturing, and really focusing a little bit on the ideas of fair data and fair principles as a mechanism for really getting started with your data governance journey. So next slide, Julian. So one of the things that we wanted to start with is to talk a little about the themes of the webinar. Data governance can be a bit of a dry topic, so we really wanted to make sure that we talk about the real issues around data governance, and not just talking about the what and the why, but approaching a little bit some of the how, some of the challenges that can be faced as you try to move down this road. But ultimately, discussing why it's really critical to really think about data governance in a more holistic way. So we're going to talk about why this matters, what the real costs are, why data governance really needs a structured data framework, the idea of potentially the fair data principles as one of those structured data frameworks to adopt, and what the barriers to adoption might be. We'll also give a short example of how you can apply FAIR principles, and then there'll be some further discussions about case studies and critical personas with some of the other presenters today. Of course, we want to have a conversation around what's next. So hopefully in the Q&A session we can do that. So let's think a little bit today about data management and the challenges. As we, I think, are all aware, data management today is really a collection of documents, spreadsheets, notebooks, emails, PowerPoints, and even just the knowledge that's in people's heads. Data is dispersed. This is not a very structured, connected way to manage information, but this is what we do pretty much across the industry today. And what this leads to is the problem of unstructured data frameworks. So can you hit the button again, Julian? There we go. So, what we see, of course, is with a lot of the technologies advancing today around IoT and the ability to capture data more efficiently, the data sets in biomanufacturing are growing exponentially. I think back even in 2018, a single manufacturing site could generate up to 10 petabytes of data a year, which is an enormous amount of data. And of course, the challenge is that 70 to 80% of this manufacturing data remains unstructured. So you're generating a lot more data, more of it's unstructured. And of course, the challenge is that when data is not structured, it's not utilized. So that, of course, is a big problem, because data is your most valuable asset as a biotech or pharma company developing a product. And of course, when data is unstructured, people waste a lot of time looking for information because it's hard to find. So, this leads to, a set of operational inefficiencies where, development slows down, critical activities like tech transfers get extended. Typical tech transfers will take longer than 18 months and often 24 to 30 months. It will extend regulatory submission preparation times because of all the work you have to do to look for information and verify it, QC it, and so forth. And of course, this also leads to really a lack of CMC agility, which is a growing problem today because the newer modalities of development, cell therapies, gene therapies, and so forth, really require a level of agility that's just not available right now in CMC because of the lack of access to organized and structured information. This also ultimately inhibits institutional knowledge, and this is also a key piece of concern today because of how frequently people are moving from one organization to another. So information that sort of sits in people's brains goes with them, and you really want to be capturing this knowledge institutionally. So what's the culprit? Well, the culprit is, as we've been discussing here internally, that the lack of data governance policies and systems to support the significantly higher volumes of data being generated today. This is a key issue, and this is what we're going to try to talk about some solutions around this during this presentation. So one of the first objectives we undertook as part of this conversation was to say, well, do we need to rethink data governance, right? We seem to think about some of these different elements of integrity and governance almost as separate issues. And if you think about what the PICS guidance even says, which was released in 2021, it defines data governance as the sum total of arrangements to ensure that data, regardless of what formats it's generated in, will ensure attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, all these adjectives that are really a recitation of the ALCOA framework. But I think what we really need to do is take a step back, and this is what we've been talking about, to think about the overall data quality pyramid and understand that data governance really is one of the elements of overall data quality. It starts really with data culture, which is really a mindset of an organization in terms of how it thinks about its data and how it handles and manages its data, and how it sort of trains the organization overall to manage data. With a strong data culture, you can then build, a strong data governance function, which is really the operational piece of the data quality pyramid, right? So here you're putting in place the policies, the procedures, and so forth that really lead to strong data governance. And that, of course, then can ensure that your outcome, which is your data integrity piece, is strong as well. And so data governance really needs to fit within this overall construct. And we're just going to cover today the data governance piece, but we thought it was important to, discuss the fact that it really is part of a more holistic discussion around overall data quality. So if the challenge is structure, then how do we think about, putting data within a structure? And in order to do that, you have to sort of think about a specific structure. And so the FAIR structure, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, is really more of a functional structural definition as opposed to, a static or one based simply on data properties. And this is something this is an approach that's being, discussed more across a variety of industries, where the goal really is that whatever data framework you're going to put in place should meet these four basic requirements of being easily findable. So the goal here is that you should be easily able to search and locate the information based on rich and consistent metadata, that it should be accessible. So, metadata is easily retrievable by some sort of unique identifier, and also, based on the appropriate permissions to access that information. A key piece is that it should be interoperable. So, you want the data to be readily integrated with other data systems and other data types. And so really from an integration perspective, it's important to consider, how your data is going to function relative to these other systems and how it's going to interact with them. And finally, reusability is a key piece as well, right? So, there's a theme here that data should be, well described by metadata and rich metadata, and that metadata should be relevant to whatever industry you're operating in. But when it's structured appropriately, it can be reused in a way that really provides digital leverage, right? So you can define things once maybe as templates and then continue to use them over and over again because they've been defined digitally, and that really facilitates that reusability. One of the key objectives here is to really start to think about indexing content and not files and documents. So as an industry, we have been spending the past few decades really focused on indexing files and documents. As you think about moving to a FAIR structure, you're really starting to think about indexing content. And so the idea really here is to pull data out of documents. Documents are rich in their narrative text, but they are not essentially objects with rich metadata. They don't meet the requirements of the FAIR structure because data is not easily findable or interoperable or accessible or even reusable. You're literally just copying and pasting as a mechanism to reuse information. And so the goal here really is to think about indexing the content inside the documents. And that really means, categorizing them in a way that does provide where it is easily indexable and searchable, where you can build rich metadata structures around the key pieces of data. And so really you're going from document-centric to a more atomic data posture. Once data is atomic, now you can begin to link it. So this is the interoperability piece. And then, now you're building multi-dimensional data sets that are easily addressable and linked. And so now interoperability and reusability really become key pieces of the FAIR structure that now are being realized once you think about indexing the content in your documents, but not the documents themselves. So let's talk about embracing FAIR for biomanufacturing, right? There are a number of data domains within the CMC space, or the chemistry, manufacturing, and control space, which lend themselves really well to the application of FAIR, whether you're talking about product characteristics or process development, your quality attributes, control strategies, material control, moving into tech transfer and so forth. These all require rich data sets. They require historical data sets, so you can trace not only to other relevant pieces of information and metadata, but also being able to trace over time. And so, this is intended to show that many elements of knowledge for the biomanufacturing and CMC lifecycle could benefit from FAIR constructs, with the objective of driving better data governance. So what are some of the barriers to FAIR adoption? It's not as easy as saying, okay, let's just put a structure in place and go. There are a number of challenges that make it difficult to move forward, and these are some of the things that have to be recognized as you think about driving a different data governance approach based on a more structured data set. I think one of the first things we have to think about is the Alcoa mindset. The Alcoa framework is really based on what was what is a very document-based mindset, and very focused on sort of the idea of things that are handwritten and on paper. And so how should we rethink Alcoa with a data-centric mindset? That's certainly one of the first barriers we have to address. The second piece is that database paradigms will be different really in terms of how they're utilized by different people within the CMC organization. So thinking about as you deploy a new structured approach, your database paradigms really need to be robust with respect to all the different CMC personas. And this is something that'll be covered later in some of the other discussions today in the webinar. but this is a key piece. How do we get the different roles to really buy into the fair data concept when they're all thinking and working differently? The third piece, of course, is how do you actually do the structuring and labeling, right? It's easy to say that structure is important, but it's harder to define how we should structure. And so there's a big question around, what should be the taxonomies and ontologies for building these rich, for labeling and building these rich metadata structures that can then be connected. And of course, who owns the development and management of these critical labeling systems is a key piece as well. And then finally, there's, of course, the legacy technology barrier, right? We are all very comfortable with our Word documents and our Excel spreadsheets and our PDFs and SharePoint files, even though they don't necessarily work very efficiently anymore. So how do we get past this paradigm of documents and spreadsheets and file servers, to really build a connected and digital data set that goes beyond just the concept of electronic information? So one of the things that I like to pose when we're having this conversation about rethinking Alcoa is to provide an analogy. And I think what's important here is that nobody is suggesting that you ignore Alcoa. Alcoa is a compliance framework that is required. You have to meet you'll be assessed against this framework in terms of your data integrity systems. But what we're talking about here is really rethinking it, in terms of the idea of behavior versus outcomes. And so the analogy we're putting forth here is this idea of health outcomes, where if you're going to the doctor, a lot of times they will look and they'll look at your weight and your blood pressure and your cholesterol and your blood sugar, and sort of pinpoint problems with the outcomes and then try to address the outcomes. And it seems like that is something that gets done often when we talk about dealing with data integrity, and so the data integrity issues. And obviously, a better approach to getting the outcomes that you want is really thinking about the underlying behavior or how you operate functionally. So if you're better at diet and your nutrition, you exercise regularly, you get good sleep, you minimize your stress, these are behavioral approaches that will lead to the outcomes of better, lower weight, better blood pressure, cholesterol, and blood sugar. And so, you can apply this same analogy to the idea of data integrity, where if you think about Alcoa really as the outcomes, these are sort of the static properties of your document, if you will. Is it attributable? Is it legible? Is it contemporaneous? Right? And when these outcomes are not being met, the approach is to try to address, to put procedures in place to address the outcomes. But really what we want to be thinking about is the behavioral and functional aspect of how we operate as an organization to really drive the data integrity outcomes that we desire, right? So building a strong data culture, building a strong data governance backbone, building structured data paradigms that may be based on principles like FAIR, creating these rich data and metadata, using really industry relevant taxonomies and ontologies that can ultimately build a vertically integrated knowledge base. And really you want to be supporting these with digital and not electronic technologies that can automate compliance. So what are the second piece is obviously, building the incentives for the different personas in the organization. And I think one of the things that we can all agree on is that the mindset often is very siloed, right? So organizations have these silos with respect to the information that they're managing. And a lot of times the thought process has been, well, we generate a set of data to prove something, and that's really the only reason we had it. The only reason we did that work, and then we file that away somewhere, hoping that we can find it later. But really, with the amount of data that's being generated today, we really need to rethink that as where data becomes part of an integrated and connected knowledge base that we should be sharing and making reusable, because it is the most valuable asset. So as we think about platform development and a lot of the work that's being done by a lot of companies developing whether they're mRNA platforms or CRISPR platforms or other gene therapy platforms, right? Being able to define sets of data that you can share as part of a knowledge base that can then be reused is really, is really a key element to driving, the kind of efficiencies that we want going forward. And of course, people's relationship to their data will depend on sort of their persona, right? So we've broken it out into these two concepts of, that there's a spectrum between, data creation and data consumption. And so recognizing, your role in an organization and where you fit on this spectrum is really important, right? Because that will dictate how you interact with the data sets and the structure that's being defined. And then also, if we think about the FAIR spectrum, each of the dimensions of FAIR, your role may be at different locations on that spectrum. So, if you're potentially maybe in regulatory affairs, you may be more of a consumer and not really as much of a creator of the data. For you, it's important that the information is findable and accessible to maybe generate, the documents or regulatory submissions. And so these are sort of the concepts that have to be considered as you think about building a data governance structure that's going to be relevant across your organization. So the third barrier, of course, is, identifying taxonomies and ontologies, really try to understand what's relevant. And so, to implement FAIR principles effectively, development programs in biomanufacturing need a clear, consistent, standardized, and domain-relevant labeling strategy that can be used to operate more efficiently and be able to search and link and contextualize all this data for a program. So, if we think about all the different biomanufacturing sets that we had identified in one of the previous slides, they are all they can all utilize this approach, whether they're product requirements and attributes or your manufacturing process operations, right? And then the question, of course, becomes which set of taxonomies and ontologies should you use? ICH, GMP, QBD, ISO. There's a variety of different ways you can start to organize your information, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end about what direction should you go in. But there's a lot of different choices out here, and it's important to understand, which ones you're going to apply for the different data sets and the different stages in your life cycle. So the final barrier is the idea of updating legacy technologies. And, we have over the past 20 years spent a lot of time moving from paper to electronic. But electronic really was just essentially this idea of paper on glass, right? So, replicating paper-based workflows or paper-based visualizations and presentations, in an electronic format is what we've been doing for the past 20, 30 years. But now as the amount of data explodes and we really want to think about structuring this information so you can connect it and find it, we really have to think about moving digital, right? And moving to digital means really deploying relational databases, some of the new technologies around, graph databases, right? This is the direction that the industry is heading in, and many other industries have already gone here because, the amount of data that's out there just requires it. You can't really think about managing and utilizing data, which is your most valuable asset, in an electronic format anymore. In a way that's really going to be efficient and utilize the power of that data. It really has to move to a digital format. And this is, and as you think about deploying FAIR structures, this is the direction that technology will head in, because the underlying approaches to managing data in a structured format really think about these types of technologies. So let's talk a little bit about how you go about doing this, right? So, verifying biomanufacturing and CMC data, we're sort of advocating a three-step approach, right? So we talked a little bit about this idea of indexing content instead of documents. And so really that three-step approach starts with atomizing data. That means sort of pulling it apart out of the documents and putting it into the defined structure that you create. Then starting to assemble it based on the rules and logic of your taxonomies, and then ultimately, linking this information based on the relevant ontologies, so you build the relationships between these atomic pieces of data in ways that make sense to the different personas that'll be using it. So as an example, we're going to build a digital quality target product profile, And for those of you who don't know what a QTPP is, it is a document or a set of information that's defined as a requirement in ICH Q8 to summarize the quality characteristics of a drug product that ideally will be achieved to ensure the desired quality, taking into account safety and efficacy of the drug product. So step one, atomizing the data, right? So, today QTPPs really are documents that sit in folders. They tend to be quite static, but they're really comprised of individual elements that are the requirements. They're the product requirements that will ultimately ensure product quality and safety. So you can think about atomizing the elements of the quality target product profile into their individual requirement elements. And so once you've done that, now you're starting to create the flexibility to separately define and manage and track each element instead of the whole document. So if you think about that diagram of the relational database or the graph database, these individual elements are the basically individual circles that can then be connected. And now what you've done is you've indexed the QTPP content. And then you can come back later and generate potentially a document as a collection of these individual elements. But the first key piece is that you've atomized each of these individual requirements, and now you can think about building this into a taxonomy and building rich metadata around each requirement. And so now, we go to step 2 to do this assembly. This is an example of starting to organize and put context around data. So you have all these separate requirements in a quality target product profile, and now you start to organize them. And here's an example that's a common one where you define, the general attributes of the product, specific quality-related attributes and specific performance-related attributes. And so now, with requirements being individually, atomized or atomic, you can easily categorize them separately, and then each element's going to have its own set of associated metadata. In this example, we are sort of using the taxonomies of ICH and QBD, but of course, you could pick a different set of taxonomies that might be relevant to your organization and to your personas. This is just an example of how one set of taxonomies can be used to start to organize your information that has been separated. And finally, the third piece is to link this information. So, now you have general quality and performance attributes, and now you can start to build the relationships between them, based on whatever ontological rules you want to deploy, right? So now in this scenario, we're linking attributes or parameters of another layer like the manufacturing process directly to the product requirement layer. And these links can be made in multiple dimensions, right? You can make them based on the effect of the input to the output. You can do it based on risks. You can do it based on your data, based on control strategies. There's a lot of different ways you can make these links. But ultimately, you have the flexibility to do this now, given that you've broken these elements of information apart. And again, in this example, we're just sort of using the ontologies of ICH, QBD, and GMP to build these relationships between the different elements that have been indexed separately. So we've gone through a discussion around data governance, why it is a key layer of the data quality pyramid, but also recognizing that the data culture foundational layer below it is going to be just as important, and that really needs to be considered as you think about building some of these capabilities within your organization. Data volumes are going to continue to grow exponentially, and that's going to continue to challenge data governance in the absence of structured frameworks. So it's really not a question of if, but it's a question of when you're going to head in that direction as an organization. And the FAIR structure is an interesting functional and contextual data paradigm, which is really well suited to supporting more effective data governance and just the overall data quality pyramid across the spectrum of the data processing requirements and personas. So But ultimately, fair data paradigms need well-defined taxonomies and ontologies to build these rich data and metadata schemas. And so you're going to have to spend some time, in your organization thinking about how best to do that. But that does have to be a conversation with the broader roles that are going to be involved within your CMC organization. And finally, FAIR principles are well suited to digital transformation initiatives in biopharma applications. But going forward, some additional thoughts that I think everybody needs to consider, and certainly are being considered within the BioPhorum organization. It is highly unlikely that one taxonomy ontology will be able to support the entire life cycle of CMC development. And so some of the work streams are actually thinking about now what should be maybe some relevant taxonomies and ontologies that can be recommended to the industry. And it is probably also likely that you'll need to establish a set of taxonomies and ontologies that really span the life cycle for each layer of the CMC IT tech stack. So, whether, if you're in commercial manufacturing, you may be thinking about things differently than if you're in, early process development, and recognizing that the different roles within the organization think about things differently is going to be really important to build a effective set of taxonomies and ontologies. However, that being said, we do think that the ICH and QBD taxonomy ontology will likely be one of the required sets because of its alignment with global regulatory expectations and relevance across the life cycle. And going forward, data management initiatives really do need to focus on the concepts of indexing and integrating content, which is really the combination of data and context. So, just focusing on data alone can be challenging because without the context, it's hard to understand what the data means. And so that does need to be a dimension of that. And finally, digital transformation initiatives, if they're going to be effective over the long term, need to consider establishing digitally native business processes to support them, to underpin them basically, and then they need to be supported really by digital technologies and data structures that go beyond the capabilities of today's electronic approaches. So that's our summary and additional thoughts. And thank you for your attention, and we'll look forward to the discussion after the rest of the talks today.
Thank you very much, Yash. Perhaps people can show their gratitude in the little react button at the top there, maybe. We've got a number of questions that have come in, so that would be fantastic for later on. There was one question I did see about the slides. What I can say is we are producing a paper on this very topic, which are based upon the slides that Yash has presented. The recording of the webinar, the links to the roadmap. So everybody who's on the call will get a nice package of stuff that's sent to their email. Okay, so thank you for that, Yash. I will now call up a couple of speakers. We have John McGuire and Deborah Rogers are going to talk to us a little bit about use cases. This is the idea of FAIR principles and critical personas actually being used in situ in sort of real world cases. So John is Director of Manufacturing Sciences at Sanofi, specifically within the mRNA Center of Excellence. Despite his young looks, he says he has 20+ years of experience.
Very kind.
A number of pharmaceutical companies, but very much working around supporting manufacturing, various roles, project management, process engineering, implementing manufacturing systems, etc. So his current responsibilities, or one of them, is to manage GXP manufacturing data generated during the production of preclinical and clinical material, which I presume means a lot of data. So John, I'm just going to pull up your slides.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Julian, and thank you for the kind words about my young looks. I'm not young anymore. I was once, but anyway, I wanted to also thank you and the organizers for inviting me to share our experiences with our data management initiatives at Sanofi's mRNA Center of Excellence. And I'm really honored to be here to talk about this topic. To me, it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. So I've lived some of this pain, having to deal with data that's unstructured, and realize that how important it is to have really good structured data sets so that we can enable our people and our organization to make good scientific database decisions very quickly. There's so many amazing digital technologies that are out there that are so useful for our people in the industry, and really without structured data, they're no good to us. So I think that we owe it to our people, we owe it to our companies to start to better manage our data. This is what we're trying to do here and at Sanofi's mRNA Center of Excellence, and we've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go. And you'll see, in my presentation, kind of some of our journey there. Yash, I did wanted to say that your presentation was amazing as always. It's always very insightful to hear you speak. I can see with some of the messages in the chat that you have similar opinions, where I feel like you're speaking directly to me, especially around some of the topics you were talking about, fair data adoption, and how organizations really have this need for data governance and how important that is. So if you can go to the next slide, Julian, we can get right into it here. I wanted to start by giving a little bit of a background on Sanofi's mRNA Center of Excellence, and kind of, it's a relatively new business unit at Sanofi Greater. But really where the story begins was at Translate Bio, which was a small startup company that was located in Lexington, Massachusetts. It's about, I'd say, 5 or 6 miles west of Boston. Translate Bio's focus was on mRNA platform, and Translate Bio had a partnership with Sanofi for some vaccine programs. And given a lot of the successes in the industry with Pfizer and with Moderna with their mRNA vaccines for COVID, Sanofi saw that there's a lot of promise for this technology, not just with vaccines, but other areas outside of that. So Sanofi purchased Translate Bio to create this new mRNA Center of Excellence, really toward the end of 2021. Since then, we've been integrating, building the organization, and you'll see that there's programs that we're also advancing as well. We're located in multiple sites. The majority of people are located in Lyon, France, and in Waltham, Massachusetts, which is about a few miles away from where we were previously located in Lexington, just outside of Boston. We also have satellite locations in Swiftwater, Pennsylvania, Toronto, and small one in Orlando, Florida. So presently we have just over 400 full-time employees. We're still hiring. This is amazing how fast we've grown over the past year. And like I said, our main focus is on multiple vaccine programs, mRNA for multiple vaccine programs. And we're starting to look at the potential to use this mRNA technology for other therapeutic areas, oncology, and that are outside of vaccines, that are part of our global organization. So next slide, please. So our main areas of focus last year was really, we had multiple areas of focus. Number one, we needed to really build the organization, where over the course of 2022, we've more than doubled in size. So many new people to bring on. Not only were we hiring like crazy, we were also in the midst of integrating Translate Bio with Sanofi. So we had new systems we had to learn, new computers that we had to get, new business structure and organizational structure that we had to define. And all of that was happening at the same time as advancing some of very high priority programs, which were mainly focused on vaccine last year, and starting to look at other non-vaccine programs. We were also, some of these programs for vaccines were in the midst of tech transfer to our contract manufacturing organization to, make product for our clinical studies. So we had a lot going on. We still have a lot going on, and credit the organization, where there's a huge focus to digitization, really to enable our data sciences organization here, and also what we call citizen data scientists, where it's really anybody who needs to use data will be able to kind of have this data available to make these data decisions. So with that, We have tons of initiatives, especially around data management, master data governance, and deploying different systems. We're in the midst of deploying a new electronic notebook system in Waltham, and also ERP system in Waltham as well. So we're very busy. So next slide, please. So, title of the slide is problem statement. I always like to start with, what is the problem that we're trying to address here? And this problem statement, something that dated back to when we were still Translate Bio, and continued, once we began our integration with Sanofi. And the problem was something that Yash had talked about in his presentation as well, where the main cause was this: we had a lack of any type of real governance to manage our data. And the data that I'm dealing with is mainly manufacturing data, and that covers any batch release or stability data, any manufacturing process data, any raw materials attribute data, and also any batch contextual data as well. And by batch contextual data, I mean, what scale was a batch, what manufacturing site, whether it was GMP or non-GMP, what was the batch used for, that and that sort of thing. Is what I mean by batch contextual data. And all of these data sources were previously, or any time we receive data, it's all really paper-based. So we'll receive a certificate of analysis document that describes the attributes of our raw materials. All of our manufacturing is done on paper batch records. This is for any GLP or for toxicology batches, or any manufacturing batches that are GMP that support clinical studies, all done on paper. Our testing labs will provide us with certificate of tests for batch release and stability data. So this is all data that comes in on PDF or paper. And previously this data just got stored everywhere on a shared drive. So anytime anybody needed to use this data to do any type of GMP investigation, or build out a in-process controls, or do any type of filing, it became an Easter egg hunt to look for this information. The files weren't named really very intuitively. They weren't located in the greatest places. So you really had to kind of open files, look for this data, assemble it in your own Excel table, and then verify that the data was accurate before you were able to really use that to ensure any type of data integrity. So this was a real challenge. This is a pain that I lived. One of my colleagues, we were banging our head against pretty much the same wall, trying to find this information, and we said there's got to be a better way. So we, I'm an optimist, so I see this problem statement as really an opportunity to improve on how we're doing, doing our data management. So my colleague and I wanted to really make sure that we had good data integrity and accessibility to this aggregated data set that was verified and controlled, so that when people were doing these tasks that we were doing, assembling data, that the data was there for them. Really, if I could boil this initiative down to one sentence, it's really to put the data into the hands of people who need it. And how do we do this? We wanted to achieve this by creating good business processes, create good data standards, and with the use of system implementations, really achieve that goal of getting the data to hands of people who need it. So that's really what we were trying to do here. So Julian, if you could please go to the next slide. So here's, I call this a path. A path really kind of implies that you're going on a pleasant hike. This is really more of a journey, not sometimes arduous, but very educational for me. So we started by doing some foundational work to get this journey started, where we assembled this cross-functional team. You do these things as a team. None of these great things are done by any one person. You have to do them together. We drafted a charter to really understand what it is that we were trying to achieve, and determine what our structure was going to be for our data sets, and then define what some of these data management business processes were. I think that really the core thing here is understanding who's going to do what, how data is going to flow through the system, how are we going to manage source documents, and really create some standard operating procedures around this, because, we wanted to be able to use this data to make GMP decisions. So we really wanted to, create some standard procedures, have this in our quality system so that people could follow that and have good data integrity there. So once we did a lot of that foundational work, we needed to set up our system. So we created our infrastructure, and we started to build our tables, and then trained our people on how we were going to be, how they needed to do their data entry. And when with that, there was some source document organization that we had to do so that we didn't have to go through all of the shared folders to look for the source documents. And with that, we began to activate our business processes and begin our data entry and verification of our historical data and any new data that was coming in, and start to refine some of those data flows to, lead into some of this continuous improvement activities. One of the things we noticed, this is historical data, was data that we had generated over the course of many years. So there was a bit of a harmonization that we needed to do, particularly around the taxonomy, to make sure that it was usable. And then with that, we were able to create data visualization portals to really get that data accessible to people. Next slide, Julian, please. So underneath all of that is really a need for this master data management and data governance. And now that we have some structured data, we really can kind of start to use that in many different ways. So in the left side here were the different databases that we want to be able to tap into. The GXP database is the one that I manage, but there are also other non-GXP databases and other source data bases as well that we really want to be able to combine so we can get a good view of our end-to-end process. And we're in the process of implementing a data aggregation system, which we're looking at a no-code or low-code system where we can connect to these data sources and begin to aggregate that to enable data visualization, different dashboards or reports as outputs, and also use the same data set really to have one version of the truth for our data sciences team to start to build artificial intelligence or build some machine learning models. Julian, next slide, please. So when I started to create the slide, I was going to put some challenges down, but I feel like everybody has the same challenges. And me being an optimist, I really wanted to show what made this successful for us. And really, when I think about it, it's really these four things. The collaboration that we had across our 5 different functional areas really allowed for us to be able to exchange our ideas and be creative. We had unbelievable support from the senior leadership team to really get behind what we were doing. Then this effort was really mainly a business-driven effort. It came from the needs of the people who need that data. We get some support from the digital team, but really, when I look at this is really something that was born from the business. And really, we had the right people on this project. I've worked with the most brilliant people that I know, people that I've worked with throughout my career that were able to kind of help with this. Me, I'm really just a hype man, but these are the people that really did the work, the people on that team to really, again, meet that goal to put the data into the hands of the people who need it. So I really, again, I know I went through that very quickly, but I appreciate you listening to me, and I wanted to say thank you again to the organizers, and thank you for hearing our story about our data management.
Thank you very much, John. That was very interesting. And in the interest of time, I'm going to push on and call upon Deborah, who's going to talk to us about using personas at Pall. And Deborah has been, she's a user experience researcher, or the principal user experience researcher at Pall. I was interested to see here that she says that she's, previous to working with the biotech world, she's worked in consumer audio and entertainment, so Bose, Sonos, and Replay TV were part of that. And perhaps even more interesting, one of your first roles was with Cooper Interaction Design, where Alan Cooper, who was one of the pioneers, or if not the pioneer, of using personas. So you've got a lot of credibility in what you're about to say. So Deborah, the floor is yours.
All right, great. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I think we can, hopefully.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, excellent. All right. Nice to have you all here. I appreciate being invited as well, and it's been a great session so far. So what I'm going to do is just kind of briefly talk through a little bit about how to approach personas and bring them into your fair data design process, mostly because personas are a really useful way to kind of get out of your own head and make sure that you're designing systems that other people can use. So the next slide. Okay. So one of the points I think about today is really you're all designers now, and so personas are a tool for designers, just like there are good practices in lab and manufacturing. Personas are a tool to help you clarify and simplify the design process, and make sure that you're able to address the needs specifically of your end users. So personas are a way of modeling end user data. It's basically a mnemonic that helps you to quickly recall and to share information about your key users with other people so that you can make relevant design decisions. And it might help to know that the original term personas actually came from Alan Cooper borrowed that from the theater. So a persona was a character basically in a play. You can think of it that way. So you're building your own characters in your own sort of play and your own ecosystem. There are also some. There's been some persona work and user study work done through the BioPhorum. So I want to just mention that that's available on their website. And the overall hope behind personas is really that by focusing on these archetypal characters, you can make sure that you're designing for them and not for our own sort of needs or idiosyncrasies. All right. So you can start really quickly with personas just by using a template. These are widely available on the web, and they generally share a few key features. They focus on motivations, behaviors, challenges, and goals. And one of the things that you'll notice on this particular template is that there are some sliders under behavior. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that will help you when you're building your persona ecosystem to kind of identify different ends of the spectrum that you might be representing within your persona group. Right, shall we go ahead? Okay. So when we think about using those goals and behaviors to address fair needs, this is one of the places where you want to bring in what you've kind of populated those persona templates with to really help to sort of hone in how you're going to design this for the end users themselves. So if we think about those fair principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, the goal here is really to kind of think about those for a little bit, at least specifically through the lens of your personas. So when we think about findable, it's not just how will everybody find the data, but how specifically will your end users find the data. And one of the things you then need to start with is where are they going to look? So you can, as we all know, you can develop the best sort of system of organization possible, but if people are thinking about it differently, they're maybe never going to find what they're looking for. So this is where personas come in to help us really leverage what their needs are and make sure that we design something that they're able to access as well. So that's the same with something accessible. Where are they going to look for the data? Do they have access to that data? Are they able to easily verify the data? With interoperable, it's a similar issue. What kind of systems are they using? This is sort of a good place where you can think about, 10 years ago, would you have designed a data set that could be accessed by mobile phones? Maybe not, but now you certainly would do that. So think about things that might be on the rise or that you might find that your personas are using tools more readily than you are. And so that's a helpful way to make sure that you're designing for what kind of where they're at instead of thinking about it more abstractly. And similarly with reusable, obviously, what other data do they want to use their information with, and how are they trying to link those up? The next slide. So one of the kind of a simple thing to know about personas as well is that there are different ways that you can design them. In consumer audio, the sort of consumer products are much more attribute and attitudinal focused. We want to know kind of what sort of consumer are you. But when we look to job based personas and business environments, they're more likely to be role based, hierarchically based, or based on expertise. And another example might be something that Yash brought up earlier is this might be a good place where you would look at, are you a creator or a consumer? And you might have two different personas for the creator and the consumer. So roles-based are simply, you can see why they're easy to employ because they are really using people's job roles essentially, or their main area of expertise in order to understand their different needs based on those roles. So quality engineer is going to have different needs from a process development scientist, and you can, if both of those are some key users for you, you can really start to see how you could list out some different answers to those questions about fair access for each of those different people. Hierarchy can be an important one. We know that management and like a supervisor or an executive is going to want a different kind of access. They generally are going to want something that's higher level, not with as much detail. They maybe want to see a broader picture of the implications, that sort of thing, versus other people who might be accessing it for different reasons. Expertise is a good place to look as well for differentiation among your personas. The novice persona is going to have much fewer tools at their disposal. And we know that people who are more expert generally appreciate having a lot more ability to manipulate, kind of get under the hood and check things out on their own. And then there are still attribute-based that you could do within this business environment. You could compare, some people are looking forward, trying to move themselves, advance themselves in their career, so they might be a little bit more proactive. Other people may be just wanting to maintain the status quo of their jobs and make sure that they're doing a good job. And those two different kind of attitudes toward work might impact how they are going to engage with the data and what they'll look for. So one more slide, I think. Thank you. And just to sort of wrap up this quick introduction, if you really, to use the full value of personas, it's important to choose a primary persona and to focus your decisions around that single key persona. While it seems a little bit counterintuitive because you may have created a whole ecosystem. We've been talking about a number of different roles and um, types of people and types of job roles together. In fact, you can get the best sort of out of your design if you're able to figure out the primary user and focus most of your decisions on them. And then the way you might interact then is that you might pick a secondary persona. So if we look at creators versus consumers, the consumer of the data is definitely going to be the primary person that you really want to focus most of your decisions around. But a creator has some unique needs that you also need to be sure to include. They might be not part of the main interface. You might have a secondary interface for a creator. So that's just one example of how the primary and the secondary personas interact. There are other kinds of personas as well. You can have tertiary if you want to just populate your ecosystem with those. And then sometimes it's helpful to have a negative persona. That is helpful when people on the design team or within a company have disagreements maybe about who the main person should be. It's helpful sometimes to say, okay, let's come up with an agreement about who we aren't designing for, and that becomes the negative persona that you can build agreement around. So that's just a little quick intro to working with personas for fair practices.